He wasn't supposed to find anything, but the dog already knew. The wind moved first, slipping through the cracked steel seams of the bunker like a quiet breath from another time, carrying the scent of rust, damp concrete, and something older, something buried beneath years of silence. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the entrance, boots planted in frozen dirt, his breath fogging in the late afternoon air. 38 years old, once a U.S. Marine, now a man the world had learned to walk past without seeing. His coat was worn thin at the elbows, his beard uneven, his eyes the color of storm clouds that never quite cleared. In his pocket sat the receipt for the strangest decision of his life, $900, every last cent he had, traded for a Cold War bunker no one else wanted. It had felt like a joke when he signed the paper, like buying a grave with better insulation. But it was shelter. It was something. And sometimes, something was enough to keep a man moving. Beside him stood Rex, a German shepherd with a sable coat darkened along the spine, his amber eyes fixed not on Ethan, but on the open mouth of the bunker. The dog didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. A low breeze stirred the dry grass around them, whispering against the concrete structure half buried in the hillside. Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together. "Home sweet home," he muttered, though the words carried no humor. He stepped forward, boots echoing faintly as he crossed the threshold. The temperature dropped instantly, a chill that clung to the skin and settled into the bones. Inside, the air was still, heavy, untouched. A single beam of light slipped in behind him, cutting through dust that floated like forgotten memories. The walls were thick, reinforced, painted once but now peeling in long strips that curled like old paper. Pipes ran along the ceiling, silent and cold. Somewhere deeper inside, a faint metallic creak echoed, then faded. Ethan paused, listening. Nothing followed. Just silence again. "Probably just the wind," he said, more to himself than to Rex. But when he glanced back, the dog was still standing at the entrance. Not stepping in. Not retreating. Just watching. Waiting. "Come on, boy," Ethan called softly. Rex didn't respond. His ears twitched once, his body rigid, as if something inside the bunker had already spoken, and only he had heard it. Ethan hesitated. For a brief moment, doubt crept in, quiet but sharp. This place, it didn't feel empty. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just aware. He shook the thought away and took a few steps deeper inside, boots scraping lightly against the concrete floor. The beam of light behind him stretched thinner, weaker. Shadows thickened along the corners. He scanned the space. A rusted table. A broken chair. Old storage crates, long emptied. Nothing of value. Nothing worth $900. Just cold walls and forgotten years. He let out a dry laugh under his breath. Figures. But then, behind him, a soft sound. Not the wind. Not metal. A single, low exhale. Ethan turned. Rex had stepped inside. Slowly. Carefully. His paws made no sound, but his presence filled the space in a way that pushed back the silence. The dog moved past Ethan without looking at him, nose low, breathing in the air as if reading something written where no human could see. Then he stopped. Just a few feet ahead. His body stiffened. His head tilted slightly. And his gaze locked onto a section of the far wall, plain concrete, no markings, no cracks, nothing to draw attention. But Rex didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not in the bunker. Not in the walls. But in the moment itself. As if the story Ethan thought he had walked into, wasn't the one waiting for him at all. Rex did not bark, and that was what unsettled Ethan the most. In the past, the dog had always given clear signals, sharp and immediate, a trained response shaped by years of discipline and trust. But this was different. This was quieter. Slower. As if whatever Rex sensed did not belong to the kind of danger that could be named. Ethan stepped closer, his boots scraping softly across the concrete floor, the sound echoing farther than it should have. The air felt thicker here, colder by a few degrees, like the bunker was holding its breath. "What is it, boy?" he asked under his breath, though he already knew Rex would not answer in a way he could understand. The dog's nose hovered inches from the wall, drawing in the scent again and again, mapping something invisible. His tail was still, his ears forward, every part of him focused on that single patch of concrete. Ethan reached out and pressed his palm against the wall. It felt solid. Cold. Unremarkable. He knocked once with his knuckles. A dull thud answered back, heavy and flat. Nothing unusual. He knocked again, harder this time, moving a few inches to the left. Same sound. Same dead response. "See, nothing there," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. Rex did not move. Instead, he shifted slightly to the right, paused stepping with deliberate care, then stopped again. His gaze fixed on a new point. Ethan frowned. "You are sure about this, huh?" He followed the dog's lead and knocked again. This time, the sound changed. Not by much. Just a slight difference, a faint hollow beneath the surface, like tapping on something that had space behind it. Ethan froze. He tapped again, slower, listening closely. There it was. Subtle. Easy to miss if you were not paying attention. But Rex had noticed. Of course he had. Ethan leaned in, running his fingers along the seam where two sections of concrete met. At first, it looked like nothing more than age, a natural crack formed over decades. But as his fingers traced the line, he felt something else. A precision. Too straight. Too clean to be random. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something he had not felt in a long time. Curiosity. Purpose. He glanced at Rex. The dog finally looked back at him, just for a second, and in that brief exchange there was something unspoken, something steady. Not urgency. Not panic. Just certainty. Ethan swallowed and pressed harder along the seam, pushing against the wall. Nothing happened. He tried again, shifting his weight, searching for any give. The bunker remained still, silent, as if testing him. "Come on," he whispered, more to himself now. His hand moved lower, brushing against a small patch of metal half buried in the concrete, no larger than a coin, dulled by time and dust. He would have missed it if Rex had not brought him here. Ethan wiped it clean with his sleeve. It was not decoration. It was a button. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he was afraid of what might happen, but because of what it might mean if something actually did. If this place was more than just a forgotten shelter. If the $900 he had spent was not the end of his story, but the beginning of something else entirely. Rex sat down slowly beside him, calm now, patient. Waiting. Ethan let out a long breath, his fingers hovering over the small piece of metal. "All right," he said quietly. "Let us see what you found." And then, with a steady hand, he pressed it. The click was almost too soft to be real. For a second, nothing happened. No movement, no sound, just the same heavy silence pressing in from all sides. Ethan held his breath without realizing it, his finger still resting against the cold metal as if the bunker itself might change its mind. Then, somewhere deep behind the wall, a mechanism stirred. It began as a faint vibration, a low hum that traveled through the concrete into his palm, into his bones, like something waking up after a very long sleep. Rex stood immediately, ears sharp, body alert but not afraid. He did not step back. He leaned forward. The wall in front of them gave a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first, then a narrow line appeared along the seam Ethan had traced moments ago. Dust fell in thin streams as the hidden section slowly separated from the rest, inch by inch, revealing darkness behind it. The sound that followed was not loud, but it carried weight, a deep metallic glide that echoed with purpose, controlled, deliberate, as if every movement had been engineered to last decades without being touched. Ethan stepped back instinctively, his heart picking up pace, not from fear, but from the sheer impossibility of what he was witnessing. "No way," he whispered, the words barely forming. The opening widened just enough for a man to pass through. Beyond it, there was no light, only a thick, untouched black that seemed to swallow the beam from the entrance behind them. The air that drifted out was colder, older, carrying a sharper scent of sealed time, like something preserved and forgotten all at once. Rex moved first. Slow, controlled steps, his nose low, reading the space ahead before committing fully. Ethan hesitated only a moment before following, ducking slightly as he crossed the threshold. The temperature dropped again, noticeable now, enough to raise a chill along his arms. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, the kind he had carried out of habit more than necessity. The beam flickered once before holding steady, cutting through the darkness in a narrow path. What it revealed made him stop. The room was not large, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, but it was nothing like the rest of the bunker. The walls here were smooth, reinforced with metal panels instead of raw concrete. A small desk sat against the far side, untouched by decay, its surface clean beneath a thin layer of dust. Shelving units lined one wall, holding sealed containers, neatly arranged as if someone had planned for this space to remain intact long after everything else faded. And in the center of the room, a single steel case rested on a raised platform, locked, preserved, waiting. Ethan lowered the flashlight slightly, his mind trying to catch up. This was not storage. This was not random. This had been built with intention. Someone wanted this hidden, he murmured, the realization settling slowly. Rex circled once, then stopped beside the steel case. He did not touch it. Did not paw at it. He simply sat, calm again, his gaze lifting to meet Ethan's as if to say this was it, this was what he had been trying to show him all along. Ethan stepped closer, each movement careful, almost respectful, like approaching something sacred. His reflection stared back at him faintly in the dull metal surface, a man who had spent months believing he had reached the end of the road. And now, standing here, in a room that should not exist, he felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. He crouched down, brushing dust from the top of the case, revealing a faint marking etched into the metal. Letters. Numbers. Government issue. Old. Precise. Official. His pulse tightened. This was bigger than he had imagined. Bigger than money. Bigger than survival. Rex let out a quiet breath, steady and grounded, anchoring the moment. Ethan rested his hand on the cold surface of the case, feeling the weight of it, the story locked inside. For the first time in a long while, he was not thinking about where he would sleep tomorrow or how long his last dollars would stretch. He was thinking about what came next. And somewhere in the silence of that hidden room, it felt like the answer was already waiting. The steel case did not look old in the way the rest of the bunker did. It had no deep rust, no flaking edges, no sign of surrender to time. It looked preserved. As if it had been waiting, untouched, for exactly this moment. Ethan ran his hand slowly across its surface, feeling the faint chill of metal that had not known sunlight in decades. His fingers paused over the etched markings again, tracing each letter carefully, the way he had once read coordinates on a map, searching for meaning between lines that did not speak plainly. Government issue. That much was clear. But this was not something left behind by accident. This had been sealed. Protected. Hidden on purpose. Rex shifted slightly beside him, not restless, not impatient, just present. The kind of presence that reminded Ethan he was not alone in this moment, even though it felt like the world above had fallen miles away. Ethan exhaled slowly and glanced around the room again, this time with sharper eyes. The desk in the corner drew his attention. It was too clean compared to everything else. He stood and moved toward it, each step measured, careful not to disturb whatever quiet order had been left behind. The flashlight beam slid across the surface, catching the edge of a small object tucked near the back. A key. Simple. Brass. No label. No tag. Just resting there as if it had been placed with intention. Ethan stared at it for a moment, a faint tension rising in his chest. It felt almost too convenient. Too deliberate. Like whoever had designed this place had expected someone to find it eventually. He reached out and picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked. Solid. Real. He turned it over in his fingers, the metal catching the dim light, then glanced back at the steel case. Rex followed his gaze but did not move, his calm unwavering, his trust absolute. Ethan walked back slowly, the faint sound of his boots echoing softly in the sealed room. Each step felt louder now, like the space itself was listening. He crouched again in front of the case, the key resting in his palm, his thumb brushing along its edge. For a brief moment, doubt returned. Not fear of what was inside, but of what opening it might change. Because whatever this was, it had been hidden for a reason. And once opened, it could not be unseen. Rex let out a soft breath, barely audible, but enough. Enough to steady him. Ethan nodded slightly, more to himself than anything else, and guided the key toward the lock. It slid in smoothly, as if it had never been removed. He paused, hand resting on the cold metal, then turned it. The click this time was louder. Final. A small release echoed within the case, followed by a faint shift of internal latches unlocking one by one, precise and mechanical. Ethan lifted the lid slowly. The hinges moved without resistance, oiled to last, revealing the contents inch by inch as the beam of his flashlight followed. Inside, the first thing he saw was not money. Not gold. But files. Stacks of them, neatly organized, sealed in protective sleeves, each marked with official insignias and dates that reached back decades. Beneath them, something else. Small metal containers, secured in place, each one labeled with numbers and codes that meant nothing to him yet carried a weight he could feel without understanding. Ethan swallowed, his mind racing, trying to piece together what he was looking at. This was not a forgotten stash. This was a record. A secret. Something that had been meant to stay buried. He picked up the top file carefully, opening it just enough for the light to catch the first page. Names. Locations. Operations. His eyes moved across the lines, and something inside him tightened. Not recognition. Not exactly. But familiarity. The kind that came from years of service, from knowing how the world really worked beneath what people were told. He lowered the file slowly, his breath steady but heavier now. This is not just history, he murmured. Rex remained beside him, quiet as ever, his presence grounding the moment. Ethan looked back into the case, then around the hidden room, the realization settling deeper with every passing second. Whatever he had just found, it was never meant for someone like him. And yet, somehow, it had found him anyway. The weight of the file in Ethan's hands felt heavier than paper should. Not because of its size, but because of what it carried between its pages. He flipped one sheet slowly, then another, the faint sound of paper against plastic echoing softly in the sealed room. Each line was precise, structured, deliberate. Names followed by dates. Locations paired with operations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just facts. Clean. Controlled. Final. The kind of writing that did not leave room for interpretation. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as his eyes moved across the page. He had seen this format before. Not these exact files, not these exact names, but the pattern. The language of things that were never meant to be discussed out loud. He closed the folder halfway, letting it rest in his hands as he exhaled slowly. Someone kept records, he murmured, his voice low, thoughtful. Rex shifted beside him, lowering himself to the ground, but his eyes never left Ethan. There was no tension in the dog now. No urgency. Just a quiet steadiness, as if the discovery itself had already been accepted. Ethan set the file carefully on the edge of the open case and reached deeper inside. Beneath the stacks of documents were the metal containers he had noticed earlier. He lifted one slightly, testing its weight. It was sealed tight, labeled only with a sequence of numbers and a faded insignia that time had nearly erased. He turned it slowly in his hands, the cool surface catching the beam of the flashlight. It was not decorative. Not symbolic. It was functional. Purposeful. Whatever was inside had been placed there with intent. He set it back down gently, resisting the urge to open everything at once. Years ago, he had learned that rushing into the unknown rarely ended well. You observed first. You understood. Then you acted. That discipline had stayed with him, even when everything else had fallen apart. Ethan leaned back slightly, sitting on the cold floor, his back resting against the reinforced wall. The hidden room felt different now. Not just a place, but a presence. A quiet witness to something that had outlived the people who built it. His gaze drifted to the desk again, then to the shelves, then back to the open case. Why hide this here? He asked softly, not expecting an answer. Rex let out a slow breath, the faint sound grounding him again. Ethan looked over at the dog and gave a small nod. Yeah. That is the question. He reached for another file, this one thinner, its cover marked differently. Less official. Less structured. When he opened it, the tone changed immediately. The writing inside was not typed. It was handwritten. Careful, but human. The lines were not perfectly aligned. The ink had faded slightly in places. This was not a report. This was a record of thought. Of reflection. Ethan's eyes moved across the first page, slower this time, absorbing not just the words, but the intent behind them. The writer spoke of uncertainty. Of decisions made in silence. Of things that could not be explained to the public, but still needed to be remembered somewhere. Ethan's breathing slowed as he read. This was not just data. This was a voice. Someone had left this behind, not for authority, not for control, but for truth. He turned another page. Then another. The deeper he went, the clearer it became. This bunker was never just a shelter. It had been a vault. Not for money. Not for weapons. But for something far more complicated. Accountability. Ethan closed the folder gently, holding it in his lap for a moment as he stared at the floor. His life over the past year had been reduced to simple questions. Where to sleep? What to eat? How to make it through another day? But now, sitting in this hidden room, those questions felt distant. Smaller. Because something else had taken their place. Responsibility. He looked back at the open case, then at Rex. The dog met his gaze calmly, unwavering, as if he had already accepted whatever came next. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. You really picked something this time, did you not? He said softly. Rex's ears twitched once, but he remained still. Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling into something steadier, something more grounded. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel lost. He did not feel invisible. He felt chosen. Not by chance. Not by luck. But by something quieter. Something that had waited patiently, hidden beneath layers of time, until the right pair of eyes and the right kind of heart walked through that door. And now that he was here, the question was no longer what he had found. The question was what he was going to do with it. The room felt smaller now, not because its walls had moved, but because Ethan understood what it held. Knowledge had a way of doing that. It closed distance. It made things heavier. He sat there for a long moment, the folder resting in his hands, the quiet hum of the bunker pressing in around him like a memory that refused to fade. Then, slowly, he set the papers back into the case with care, aligning them exactly as he had found them, as if respecting an order he had not created but now felt responsible to preserve. Rex watched without moving, his steady presence anchoring the space between thought and action. Ethan wiped his hands against his coat, not because they were dirty, but because he needed to feel something ordinary again. The cold fabric, the rough stitching, the simple reminder that he was still just a man standing in a place that should not exist. He stood and turned his light toward the shelves once more, this time paying closer attention to the details he had overlooked before. Each container was labeled, each position intentional. Nothing here was random. He reached out and picked up one of the smaller cases, turning it slowly until he found a faint engraving along the side. Coordinates. Not numbers he recognized immediately, but numbers that meant somewhere. Somewhere real. Somewhere that existed beyond this hidden room. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly as he turned it again, committing the sequence to memory without realizing he was doing it. Old habits did not fade. They adapted. He set the container back down carefully and stepped away, his mind already moving ahead, connecting pieces that had not yet fully formed. This is bigger than one place, he said quietly, more certain now. Rex stood as well, his nails clicking softly against the floor, the only sound in a room designed to swallow everything else. Ethan walked back toward the entrance of the hidden chamber and paused just before stepping through, glancing back one more time. The steel case remained open, the files inside untouched since he had returned them, the quiet still intact. It felt wrong to leave it exposed. He moved back, closed the lid gently, and turned the key again until the lock sealed with a soft, final click. The sound echoed differently this time. Not like discovery. Like decision. He slipped the key into his pocket and straightened, his shoulders settling into a posture he had not held in a long time. Purpose had a shape. It had weight. And it fit him in a way nothing else had lately. When he stepped back through the hidden opening, the larger bunker felt almost familiar now, less like a tomb and more like a threshold. The faint light from the entrance reached him again, soft and distant, reminding him that the world above still existed, unchanged, unaware. Rex moved ahead of him this time, not leading, but walking beside him, their pace matched, their silence shared. As they reached the main corridor, Ethan paused again, listening. Not for danger. Not for threat. But for anything that might tell him this had all been something else. A mistake. A coincidence. But there was nothing. Just the same low stillness. The same quiet air. The bunker held its secrets without protest. Ethan exhaled slowly and continued forward, each step carrying him closer to the entrance, to the fading daylight beyond. When he finally emerged, the cold air hit him differently than before. It felt sharper. Clearer. The sky above stretched wide, pale blue fading into evening, the wind brushing against the hillside in long, steady breaths. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it in, letting the contrast settle. Below. Ground, silence and secrets. Above ground, open space and unanswered questions. Rex stepped out beside him and sat, looking out across the empty land, calm as ever. Ethan glanced down at him, then back at the horizon. We cannot pretend we did not see it, he said quietly. The words were not heavy. They were simple. Certain. Rex did not respond, but he did not need to. Ethan nodded once, almost to seal the thought, and slipped his hands into his coat pockets. The key rested there, small but undeniable. A piece of something larger. Something unfinished. The wind moved again, brushing past them both, carrying no answers, only the quiet reminder that whatever came next would not come from chance. It would come from choice. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole was ready to make one. The night settled slowly over the hillside, not all at once, but in layers, like a curtain drawn with careful hands. Ethan did not leave. He could have driven away, found a gas station, a diner, somewhere warm and familiar, somewhere that asked nothing of him. But instead, he stayed. A small fire crackled just outside the bunker entrance, its light flickering against the concrete walls, casting long shadows that moved like quiet thoughts. Rex lay nearby, his body relaxed but alert in that way only a dog could manage, resting without ever truly letting go of awareness. Ethan sat on an old crate he had dragged out earlier, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands loosely clasped together. The key pressed against his thigh through the fabric of his pocket, a constant reminder that the day had not ended the way it began. He stared into the fire, watching the flames shift and curl, the orange glow reflecting in his eyes. "Coordinates," he said softly, breaking the silence for the first time in a while. Rex's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, but he did not lift his head. Ethan leaned back a little, looking up at the sky where the first stars had begun to appear, faint but steady. That container, it was not just storage. It was a direction. The words came slowly, as if he was building them as he spoke. His mind replayed the numbers again, over and over, each digit settling into place with the kind of precision that had once been second nature to him. He had not needed to write them down. He remembered. He always did. A light breeze moved across the hillside, carrying the scent of dry grass and cooling earth. It brushed against his face, grounding him in the present even as his thoughts moved ahead. Somewhere out there, beyond the quiet stretch of land and the fading road he had driven in on, those coordinates pointed to something. Another place. Another piece of whatever this was. Ethan rubbed his hands together slowly, feeling the roughness of his skin, the small scars that had faded but never disappeared. "This was never meant to be found all at once," he murmured. "It is a trail." Rex lifted his head now, watching him, his gaze steady and calm. Not questioning. Not doubting. Just present. Ethan glanced at him and gave a faint nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You felt that too, did you not?" The fire shifted, a small log settling inward with a soft crack. The sound echoed lightly against the bunker entrance, then disappeared into the open air. Ethan stood slowly, stretching his back, the familiar stiffness reminding him of the years that had passed, the miles he had carried in silence. He walked a few steps away from the fire and looked out across the darkening landscape. The world out there had not changed. Cars would still pass on distant roads. Lights would still flicker in homes where people had never heard of this place, never imagined what sat hidden beneath this hill. But for him, everything had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to point him forward instead of leaving him standing still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key, holding it between his fingers, turning it slightly so it caught the firelight. Small. Simple. But it carried weight far beyond its size. $900, he said under his breath, a faint breath of disbelief in the words. Not regret. Not anymore. He slipped the key back into his pocket and looked down at Rex. "We are not done here," he said. It was not a question. Rex stood, stretching once before stepping closer, his tail giving a slow, steady movement. No excitement. No hesitation. Just readiness. Ethan nodded again, the decision settling into him fully now. He turned back toward the bunker entrance, the dark opening no longer feeling like something to avoid, but something to return to. Not tonight. Not yet. There was still more to understand, more to prepare. But the path had been set. The fire behind him burned lower, its light softening, fading into embers. The night grew deeper, quieter, wrapping the hillside in a stillness that felt almost sacred. Ethan stood there for one last moment, listening to the wind, to the silence, to the steady presence of the dog beside him. Then he took a slow breath and turned away from the fire, his steps measured, his direction clear. Somewhere out there, those numbers waited. And for the first time in a long time, he was not wondering if he should follow them. He already knew he would. Morning did not arrive with noise, but with light. A pale wash of gold slipped over the horizon, stretching slowly across the hillside, touching the edges of the bunker and the scattered grass around it as if testing the ground before fully committing. Ethan was already awake. He had not slept much, not in the way most people understood sleep. His body had rested, but his mind had moved through layers of thought, turning over the coordinates, the files, the quiet weight of what he had stepped into. He stood beside his old truck, a weathered thing that had carried him through more uncertainty than comfort, the metal cooled from the night air, the windshield still holding a faint trace of dew. Rex stood nearby, watching the open land, his posture calm but attentive, as if he had already adjusted to whatever came next. Ethan ran a hand along the hood of the truck, feeling the familiar imperfections beneath his fingers. This was his world before yesterday. Simple. Limited. Predictable in its struggle. Now, that simplicity was gone, replaced by something that did not ask for permission before entering his life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, something he had written in the early hours when the fire had burned low and the sky had gone quiet. The coordinates. Carefully written, each number spaced with intention. He did not need to look at them to remember, but seeing them there made it real in a different way. It made it a path instead of a thought. He unfolded the paper slowly and looked at it again, his eyes scanning the sequence, mapping it instinctively against the world he knew. Not close. Not local. A few hundred miles at least, maybe more depending on the route. This was not something he could walk into casually. It required planning. Fuel. Time. And a choice that could not be undone once made. Ethan folded the paper again and slipped it back into his pocket, his thumb pressing lightly against it as if to anchor the decision in place. He glanced back at the bunker entrance, the dark opening now softened by daylight, less intimidating but no less significant. That place had given him something. Not comfort. Not safety. Something harder to carry. Direction. Rex moved closer, stopping just beside him, his presence steady as always. Ethan looked down at him and let out a slow breath. "We go together," he said quietly. Not a command. A statement. Rex's tail moved once, slow and certain. Ethan nodded, then turned and opened the truck door. The hinges creaked slightly, the sound familiar, grounding. He reached inside and grabbed a worn map from the passenger seat, unfolding it across the hood. Paper over metal. Old navigation meeting older instinct. He traced the general direction with his finger, adjusting, recalculating, aligning what he knew with what he had found. The road would not be straight. It never was. But it existed. Somewhere between the lines and the distance, there was another point waiting, another place tied to the same hidden thread that had led him here. He folded the map back up carefully and set it inside the truck. No rush. Not yet. He turned once more toward the bunker, his gaze lingering just long enough to acknowledge it, not as a place he was leaving behind, but as a place that had marked the beginning of something he could not yet fully see. "We will come back," he said softly, more to himself than anything else. Rex followed his gaze for a moment, then looked forward again. Toward the open road. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, the worn fabric shifting beneath him, the familiar smell of dust and metal settling around him like an old memory. He placed his hands on the steering wheel and paused. Not because he was unsure. But because he understood. This was the moment where the line shifted. Where survival became something else. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine responded with a low, uneven rumble, then steadied. The sound filled the quiet morning, not loud, but alive. Ethan glanced once more at Rex, who had already settled into place beside him, calm, ready. Then he looked ahead. The road stretched out in front of them, narrow at first, then widening as it disappeared into distance and possibility. He pressed his foot gently on the gas, and the truck began to move, leaving the bunker behind, carrying them toward a destination written in numbers and something deeper that neither of them needed to name. The hillside faded slowly in the rearview mirror, the entrance to the bunker becoming just another shadow in the landscape. But Ethan did not feel like he was leaving it behind. He felt like he was carrying it with him, piece by piece, choice by choice, into whatever came next. The road stretched longer than Ethan remembered roads ever feeling before, not because of distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. Hours passed in a quiet rhythm, the steady hum of the engine beneath him, the tires rolling over asphalt that shifted from smooth highway to worn backroads, then to stretches of land that felt almost forgotten. The map lay folded on the seat beside him, no longer needed for every turn, because the direction had settled into him in a way deeper than paper could guide. Rex remained still, his gaze forward, his body relaxed but aware, as if he understood that this was not just travel, but movement towards something already decided. The sky changed gradually, the bright blue of morning softening into a muted afternoon, then into the long shadows of early evening. Ethan did not rush. He did not need to. Whatever waited for him had been there long before he knew about it, and it would still be there when he arrived. That thought brought a strange kind of calm, one he had not felt in a long time. Not the absence of worry, but the presence of purpose. As the sun dipped lower, the road narrowed again, leading him toward a stretch of land marked only by a weathered sign and a broken fence line that leaned slightly with age. He slowed the truck, scanning the area, matching what he saw to the coordinates in his mind. This was it. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just another piece of land that most people would pass without a second glance. He pulled the truck to a stop and turned off the engine. The sudden silence settled around him, thick but not empty. He sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, feeling the quiet press in. Then he reached into his pocket and touched the folded paper, not pulling it out, just confirming it was still there. A habit now. A connection. Rex shifted beside him, then stood, his posture alert but calm, ready. Ethan nodded once and opened the door, stepping out into the cooling air. The ground beneath his boots was dry, uneven, scattered with small stones that shifted slightly with each step. The wind moved across the open space, carrying with it the scent of earth and distance, a reminder that this place, like the last, had been waiting without urgency. Ethan walked forward slowly, scanning the land, letting his eyes adjust, letting instinct guide what logic could not yet confirm. Rex moved ahead this time, not fast, not searching wildly, but with the same quiet certainty he had shown before. A few yards out, the dog stopped. Not abruptly. Just enough. His head tilted slightly, his body still. Ethan followed, closing the distance until he stood beside him. There was nothing obvious at first. Just ground. Just space. But then Ethan saw it. Not a structure. Not a door. A marking. Faint. Almost erased by time, but still there if you knew to look. A small metal plate embedded just beneath the surface, its edge catching the last light of the day. Ethan crouched down, brushing away dirt with his hand, revealing more of it. The same kind of metal. The same kind of intention. He let out a slow breath, not surprised, but still affected by the confirmation. Another one, he said quietly. Rex lowered himself beside him, calm, as if this was exactly what he had expected all along. Ethan sat back slightly, looking out over the land, then back at the small piece of metal now fully visible. The journey had not led him to an ending. It had led him to a continuation. A path that extended beyond one bunker, one discovery, one moment of change. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key again, holding it loosely in his hand, feeling its weight, its purpose. It was no longer just a key to a single place. It was a reminder that even when everything seemed lost, when the world had reduced him to something small and overlooked, there were still doors waiting. Still truths buried beneath layers of time. Still reasons to move forward. Ethan looked at Rex, and for a moment, there was nothing else. No past. No doubt. Just the quiet understanding between a man and a dog who had chosen to keep going together. He closed his hand around the key and stood, the fading light casting long shadows behind them. The wind moved again, soft and steady, carrying no answers, only presence. And in that moment, Ethan Cole did not feel like a man who had found something that changed everything. He felt like a man who had been given something to protect. Something to carry. Something to do. And sometimes, that was more than enough.